What happens when a woman breaks the two greatest laws of her time, the laws of men and the unwritten laws of what a woman should be? What fate awaits her when she is judged not only for her crimes, but for her very existence? The golden age of piracy whispers tales of treasure and freedom, but for the few women who dared to claim that freedom, the empire's retribution was swift, brutal, and absolute. The courtroom in Spanish Town, Jamaica, was less a hall of justice and more a furnace. Humid Caribbean air, thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, mildewed paper, and the coppery tang of fear, hung heavy under the high, dark rafters. Here, in 1720, the British Admiralty held its grim theater, and the stars of today's tragedy were two women who had scandalized the world, Bonny and Mary Read. They stood in the defendant's dock, not as cowering wretches, but with a stillness that was more unsettling than any plea. Dressed in rough, salt-stained men's clothes, their faces tanned and weathered by the sun and sea, they looked out of place amongst the bewigged, sweating judges whose faces were pale and puffy from a life lived indoors. The air was a low buzz of whispers, the rustle of fans, and the distant cry of gulls. The trial was a foregone conclusion, a piece of imperial paperwork to sanctify a hanging. Captains and sailors, their voices trembling either with fear of reprisal or righteous indignation, recounted tales of Bonny and Read fighting with pistols and cutlasses. They spoke of them as monsters in feminine form, unnatural aberrations, who had violated not only the king's law, but God's own order. One after another, the witnesses painted a portrait of terrifying competence. "She fought with a fury I've never seen in a man," one captain stammered, pointing a trembling finger at Mary Read, cursed louder than any sailor aboard. The judges nodded gravely, their minds already made up. These women were guilty of piracy, yes, but their greater crime was their audacity. When the verdict was finally read, guilty, as expected, and the sentence of death by hanging pronounced, the room fell silent, waiting for tears or pleas. Instead, a cold fire burned in Bonny's eyes. As her lover, the infamous Captain Calico Jack Rackham, was led away past her, she leaned in close, her voice a low, venomous hiss that cut through the silence. "I am sorry to see you here, but if you had fought like a man, you need not have been hanged like a dog." But for themselves, they had one final, desperate card to play, a card only a woman could hold. "My lord," Mary Read's voice rang out, clear and steady, "we plead our bellies." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Pregnancy. It was a centuries-old reprieve, a legal shield that protected the unborn child, if not the mother. The judges, momentarily flummoxed, ordered an examination. The sentence would wait. For a time, biology had cheated the gallows. The River Thames flowed cold and gray, a silent serpent winding its way past the dreary shores of Wapping. But on execution days, the silence was shattered. A roar would rise from the assembled mob, a sound of morbid curiosity, righteous anger, and grim entertainment. This was execution dock, the final, dreadful stage for those who defied the British Empire upon the high seas. Here, the Admiralty made its most gruesome pronouncements. The gallows stood not on a clean, dry hill, but at the low tide mark, its skeletal wooden arm reaching out over the murky, garbage-strewn water. It was a potent symbol. Pirates who lived by the tide would die by the tide. Their freedom, once measured by the vastness of the ocean, was now confined to the length of a rope and the rise of the water. Imagine a woman, let's call her Eleanor, captured off the coast of the Carolinas. She wasn't a famous captain, just a crew member who had chosen the brutal equality of a pirate ship over a life of servitude. Now she was the centerpiece of this ritual. The procession began at dawn, a slow, agonizing parade from the dank confines of Newgate Prison. Jostled in a cart, her hands bound, Eleanor endured the jeers and projectiles of the London crowd. They saw not a person, but a symbol of chaos, a woman who had stepped so far outside her station that she had become a monster. At Wapping, she was dragged to the gallows. The hangman, a grim functionary of the state, tightened the noose. It wasn't a clean, quick drop. The short drop was designed for a slow, agonizing strangulation. As the cart was pulled away, her body would begin its horrific, convulsive struggle at the end of the rope, a spectacle grimly known as the Marshal's Dance. The crowd would watch, captivated and terrified, until the twitching stilled. It was a lesson taught not with words, but with violated flesh. For the most notorious pirates, the lesson did not end with death. Their bodies were often left hanging, a ghastly deterrent, until 3 tides had washed over their corpses. This ultimate desecration, known as gibbeting, served as a final warning, while, rarer for women, the threat was ever present. Eleanor's story, and those of others like Mary Critchett, hanged in Virginia in 1729, were not recorded as legends. They were reduced to cautionary tales, their lives sacrificed to reinforce the unyielding order of an empire. Before the rope, there was the whip. Before the finality of the gallows, there was the raw, screaming agony of the flogging post. It was a punishment ancient and brutally effective, a tool of pain and public humiliation wielded by naval authorities to break the spirit before breaking the neck. For a female pirate, this ordeal carried a unique and terrible layer of degradation. The instrument of this torture was the catto, 9 tails, a name that sounded almost playful for a device of such exquisite cruelty. It was a whip made of 9 knotted cords of tarred rope, each designed to bite and tear at the flesh, leaving behind a crisscross of bloody furrows. A sentence of a dozen lashes could incapacitate a man. A sentence of 50 or more was a living nightmare. Picture a captured woman, her name already lost to the bureaucratic ledgers of a colonial port. She is dragged from a prison cell into the blinding tropical sun. Her back is bared and tied to a post on the docks, in full view of the town. The crowd gathers, merchants, sailors, enslaved workers, even other women and children, all drawn to the grim spectacle. Her crime was defiance, and her punishment was to be made a public lesson. The first crack of the whip is a sound that splits the air, followed an instant later by a choked scream. Each successive lash is a fresh wave of fire, stripping skin from muscle. The salt in the sea air clings to the wounds, amplifying the torment. The crowd is not silent. They jeer, they gasp, they watch. This is not just justice. It is a performance designed to reinforce the social order. This woman, who had perhaps commanded men, or stood her ground in a firefight, is now reduced to a writhing, bleeding object of the state's power. Her strength is turned into a spectacle of suffering. For the authorities, it served 2 vital purposes. It was a deterrent, a visceral warning to any other woman who might dream of such a life. And it was a ritual of degradation, a way to publicly erase the pirate's power and reassert the natural order of things. The blood that mingled with the dust of the cobblestones was a testament to her rebellion, but also a stark reminder of its cost. The scars she would carry, if she survived, were a permanent brand of her transgression. The pain was not just a punishment. It was a message, burned into her very skin and broadcast to all who watched, ensuring that the fear of the whip would echo far beyond the gallows. Not every captured woman faced the theatrical horror of the gallows or the flogging post. Some were simply lost. For them, there was no trial, no final defiant words, no entry in a court record. Their punishment was a quiet erasure, a slide into a life of bondage from which they would never emerge. They were forced into concubinage or sold into slavery, their identities, as pirates stripped away and replaced with a new, permanent state of submission. This fate was especially common in the Spanish and Portuguese colonies of the Caribbean and South America, where the lines between piracy, privateering, and the slave trade were perilously thin. Imagine a pirate vessel, defeated in a bloody naval battle off the coast of Cartagena. Among the captured crew is a woman of African or indigenous descent. She may have been a willing pirate, a cook, a gunner, or even a leader. But in the eyes of the colonial officials who board the captured ship, her skills and her choices are irrelevant. They see her skin color first, and their worldview has no room for a black female pirate. She is immediately categorized not as a criminal combatant, but as property. She is a spoil of war, no different from a cask of rum or a bolt of stolen silk. While the white male pirates are clapped in irons and marched off to face a military tribunal, she is separated from the group. There is no trial for her. Her fate is decided by a merchant or a plantation owner in a quiet ledger book transaction. She disappears into the vast, brutal machinery of the plantation economy, or is taken into the household of a wealthy official as a domestic servant and concubine. Her past is obliterated. She is no longer the woman who navigated by the stars or loaded a cannon in the heat of battle. She is simply a slave, her story swallowed by the immense, silent suffering of millions. Historians searching for her name in archives find only gaps. The records of captured pirate ships might list one negress or two Indian women among the cargo, with no distinction between those who were captives on the ship and those who were crew. This was perhaps the most insidious punishment of all. It wasn't a swift death, but a living one. It was the complete and total annihilation of a person's history and agency, a quiet suffocation of the spirit. They were not hanged as examples, they were erased, forgotten not by accident, but by a system that refused to even acknowledge their existence. Their silence in the historical record is the loudest testament to their fate. For some, death came neither from the rope nor the whip, but from the slow, creeping rot of disease and despair. It came silently, in the dark, suffocating confines of a prison ship. These decommissioned naval hulks, stripped of their masts and anchors, became floating dungeons, moored in the harbors of places like Kingston, Jamaica, or Portsmouth, England. They were the Empire's answer to overflowing jails and a hell on water. These ships were never meant for human habitation. They were tombs for the living. Imagine being a woman, captured and deemed too insignificant for a public trial, thrown below deck into one of these rotting coffins. The darkness is near total, broken only by thin slivers of light filtering through a great high above. The air is a foul cocktail of stagnant water, human waste, and death. You are shackled in the hold, packed in with dozens of other souls, pirates, rebels, debtors. The constant, gentle rocking of the ship is no longer a comfort, but a nauseating reminder of your confinement. The timbers of the hull groan around you like a dying beast. Scurvy, typhus, dysentery, the jail fever, spread through the packed bodies like wildfire. There is no medicine, no comfort, only the sounds of coughing, groaning, and the quiet weeping of men who have lost all hope. As a woman in this exclusively male hell, you are doubly vulnerable. Beyond the ever-present threat of starvation and sickness, you face the constant danger of exploitation and abuse from guards or even fellow prisoners. Your existence is barely acknowledged. You are a name on a list, if you are lucky. More often, you are simply one of the prisoners, your gender an irrelevant footnote in the grand accounting of imperial justice. Death here is not a spectacle. It is a quiet, anonymous event. One day, a body is simply dragged from its shackles and unceremoniously tossed overboard, its splash barely registering over the sound of the lapping waves. History does not record these deaths as executions. It records them as an absence. The records show a woman was imprisoned. They do not show she ever left. In the cold silence of these floating prisons, the stories of many female pirates reached their final, unwritten chapter. They were not judged by a court, but by the conditions imposed upon them. Their fate was sealed not by a verdict, but by a locked hatch and the turning of a key. They were forgotten by design, their defiance erased by the slow, grinding machinery of neglect, their final resting place the unmarked depths of the harbor.